Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. What a treat being able to see so many friends on a Tuesday. Mid-afternoon for those of us on the East Coast. Still kind of late morning for those on the West Coast. Welcome. We're just glad to have you all here. And thank you so much for joining us today for part 2 of a super exciting 2-part series. Michael and Shauna were here in May, and they started with Exploring a World of Sovereignty and Inclusion Part 1. And that is posted on the BPNN webpage. So if you missed it, I encourage you go to that page and check that out. The recordings there as well as the slide deck. So check out all of that great information. But let's find out who is joining us this awesome Tuesday. And while you're sharing with us who is here, I will introduce myself. I am Kara Georgi, the Parent Partnership Associate here at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, who probably emails many of you quite frequently with all of these great webinars. And we have a special one in store for you with Michael and Shauna returning, as well as 2 of their fellow colleagues, to have a dynamic discussion with you all today to really continue exploring this important topic. And happy to see familiar faces. So welcome. I see we have South Carolina here. So many great friends. New Hampshire, welcome, Eddie. Great to have you. Angie, welcome from Minnesota. Ooh, we have a couple people from Minnesota. Shauna, you have fellow colleagues in the house. Robin, so good to have you here. Kayla from Alabama, nice job representing your advisory council. Welcome. Dee, representing our New England states of Connecticut. Oh my goodness, look at Nicole, Tara, Steph, so many great friends. So happy to have you all here. One of the things that I think I really appreciate about our Birth Parent National Network is that we are a network of parents and organizational partners who are coming together to uplift and talk about policy and practice and talk about how do we improve things for families. And to me, one of the best parts of working at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance is meeting fellow colleagues like Michael and Shauna who have a passion and a vision. When ICWA was first coming into question at the Supreme Court level, Michael and Shauna are like, we need to talk to people about ICWA. It's important for people to know what it's all about. And then they're like, as soon as they had the decision, and I don't want to spoil it, but they were so excited, you all. And you saw their commercial, I bet, about how excited they were. They wanted to record it like instantly because they wanted to connect with all of you. And so what their plan is for you all today is we're going to dive right in. We're going to review those group norms that we had at part 1, just because it's important to establish the space that we're in together, because we have such a mixed audience. We also want to have some opening intentions, and then we're going to get into a fantastic panel discussion. We have Sheldon Spotted Elk joining Michael and Shauna, as well as Shannon Smith from the ICWA Law Center. So we are so fortunate to have them both giving us some of their time today to really share some important information in their hearts with us. And then we'll really talk about ICWA in practice. It's one of the things many of you have said that you are interested in hearing about, of what does this actually mean in my community? What does it look like? We'll have time for questions and answers. We want this chat as active as it was in part 1, just as active here in part 2. So as you're hearing things, as you're seeing the different information presented, drop your questions in the chat. Let us know what you're thinking about, because Michael and Shauna and Sheldon and Shannon will all be watching that, as well as several of us on the Alliance team. So please keep those questions coming. We'll share announcements at the end, and then of course have an evaluation. We need to hear your feedback. Michael and Shauna, that's the top thing they asked me for probably like 80 times. Kara, are there any new pieces of feedback? We want to hear from the audience. We want to know what they're thinking about. And so with that, let's jump right into our group norms for today. We know life is busy and chaotic, but we ask that in today's discussion, you're as present as you're able to be. I encourage you, if you have a lot going on in your background, shut off your camera temporarily, but then join us back on camera, because we love to be able to see you. It's our way of interacting in this virtual world. Also honor confidentiality of the things that might be shared in this space, and think about how do we do that, and honor the integrity, taking the messages forward, not necessarily the personal stories. Also assuming best intent. While we're hearing this information, for some of us, it may be our first time. We may have questions. We may have things that we don't know. So assume that the questions and things get shared today are coming from a place of good intent and good intentions. Really respecting one another's voices here today and thinking about how do we speak our truth, but most importantly, how do we take care of ourselves, relax, and have fun? And I just want to see if there's any additional group agreements that we should bring in to this space today. Welcome to Korea. Absolutely. I feel the same. I love this community and this family that the Birth Parent National Network really is, of people coming together to learn and grow together on this incredible journey called life. So any other group norms that can help you to be a participant in today's session? And feel free, you can drop them in the chat if there are any. And if not, I know you're probably all like, Kara, we're done hearing you. We're ready to hear this incredible team. All right, I'm going to assume not, but please, if there's anything that we can do to help support you during today's time together, please let us know how we can support you. And with that, last time we started with a video and we heard fantastic feedback about that video, about just the impact it had. And so Michael and Shauna chose a new video for you all today to watch to just kind of help us set the tone for today. And so I'm going to share that video with you all now.
What keeps you up at night? For me, it's many things. But I probably share the same worries as you do. About the future, and the uncertainty of the path before me. But I'll never forget what he told me. That there's always a story behind everything. Behind someone's actions, if someone's words were intended to hurt, it's how we understand if they are hurting inside. And there's a story behind the world. How many are fighting and fought and shed blood over a history of power, inequality, war, corruption. But we must understand it to move forward. This is him. Prairie Band Potawatomi, a descendant of Chief Abram Burnett and Wiskigi Amayuk. Our family is documented by the U.S. Smithsonian Institute and Library of Congress. In the tribe, there are less than 10 fluent speakers left. He is an educator and performer of authentic traditional Native song and dance. But above all else, he's my dad. I'm 18. This is me. And I worry like any other person. But I feel a bit scared. Because what happens when a story is forgotten?
Kui Juani Nira kem etem nin dak nimtem nin boxt nin gitsegis pekiakwan mekit wat papatsian gom nakendem yajuk kekiajuk nigi jaye ibe ge majesh no wat wap metso nide wap metso Kwerak ik besen doge mejvi ayek negoyek niva kises tegok mimbish skote madmoyan nim ide nagmo dewegin Yahweh need wabden miyo Nishnave manin Bore Wadminada. نشقابو نتقاش كيك يقالك عايش قاني يقاش مقاني جاجا هذا يقادا نقاش We're Anishinaabe, Potawatomi, Chippewa. I'm enrolled with the Prairie Band Potawatomis of Maida, Kansas. Originally, we're a Great Lakes tribe. We occupied about 28 million acres historically. Eventually, through complicated warfare, sensitive history, our people were relocated during the Removal Act to Missouri, Iowa, and then to Kansas. During that time, our people had to learn to change. Our great-grandfather, Chief Whiskey Amayuk, is the biological grandson of Chief Senogewon, known better as Chief Senajun, who was the principal chief of the Prairie Band. This here is a photograph of him taken in 1921 by an anthropologist named Jesse Nussbaum, who actually took this photograph for $1 silver. My great-grandfather's brother, his name is Wakabesh Cook. This is a photograph of my grandfather in 1906, along with his father, Whiskey Amayuk, who's sitting at center. This is documented in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And this is my grandfather's mother, Roseanne Lastly K.O. Komekwa. Here's a photograph of my grandfather here in 1963, your great-grandfather. That's him there in Kansas, documented as a ritual leader and elder at the time, taken by James Clifton. Now on our family in a citizen band nation, this is Chief Nanwishma, known better as Chief Abram Burnett. In his right hand, he's holding a cane. This is the actual cane here that still also remains with us in the family. And of course, it's not American Indian. It's made in Paris, France. Your grandfather, my father, here, taken around 1967, with some other tribal members, George Allen, Bernard Kisis, Gary Whiskey Amu, Curtis Pequano, and James Kegmega, taken by James Howard, an anthropologist around 1950. That's your family.
I remember learning how to dance when I was really little, 4 or 5 years old, and I loved it just because it was so fun. And that was before I learned that many languages are fading away, before I started questioning the history in textbooks, and before learning about the complicated world of politics.
Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we should not have humored him in that wanting to stay in that kind of primitive lifestyle. Maybe we should have said, no, come join us, be citizens.
There's a weight that lingers now, and I think it's the fear of losing a part of our identity forever. But everyone worries and wonders about how we'll be remembered after we pass away. And maybe it's that fear of being forgotten that makes us want to tell more stories, because if you don't tell your story, who will? Or will someone else write it instead? Or will it just be lost in time forever? I don't know, but I still try to keep that spirit of when I was a kid. Just not to worry so much, just do things out of love. And I miss that. I miss a lot of things.
For myself, growing up almost like a wanderer, like many of my friends from other enrolled tribal nations, a lot of us trying to find ourselves in the world, again, we ask, what does it really mean to be a native person? We are people that are from a tribal society and nation, but are we really a tribe? We are descendants of something that once was. I always tell people that I'd be lying to you always if I tried to pretend that I was really living a lifestyle fully like my relatives and descendants did long ago. Today, as an American Indian, we struggle with keeping language alive, keeping true culture and customs alive. There are so many influences in the world of materialistic things around our people that have basically destroyed the world of native societies. Most people believe that all natives are receiving some form of money from the federal government because they're natives that had to deal with complicated and sensitive history. But the truth is that our people do not receive money from the federal government in the manner that most Americans think. They believe we don't pay taxes, which is not true. They believe that all natives go to school and colleges anywhere and anytime they want for free. That's not true. And that all Native Americans have some form of casino upon their Indian reservation, which is extremely not true. Most tribes live in a reality of poverty. Most tribes live in a reality of high rate of suicide, alcoholism, depression. These are all things that have broken down over the generations. To strategically destroy the tribe and the nation, the reservation was a concentration camp. It was a place to imprison the native society away from their ways of thinking, from their way of living, from the way that they centered themselves in their own world. So how do you become native? What does it mean? Does it mean having long hair? Does it mean how many feathers I can put in my head? Today, most society and Americans believe that that's what it means to be native now. But that's really not the truth. The truth goes back to you as a human being and how our people long ago looked at the world and how they centered themselves. Being native was being one with earth, being one with water, being one with the spirit world, being one with the world of consciousness, being one with the world of someone who is alive and awake when one's body is sick and damaged, and when one passes on to the spirit world. Our people look at the realm of sky and space, the universe, the realm of water, and the realm of land, the realm of the dream world. These are places that our people looked upon. We are descendants of something that once was, but there are many trying to hold on to those old ways.
And so with that, I would now like to open the floor to our incredible facilitators for today, Michael Huesca and Shauna King, who are going to take us on our next piece of this journey of understanding sovereignty and inclusion. And so, Michael, I'm going to pass the floor to you and the lovely Shauna to help us with opening up and getting ready for today's presentation. And I just welcome you both, as well as our panelists who will be joining shortly. Welcome, Michael and Shauna.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to open today with this much. In lieu of a land acknowledgement, I am smudging because we are going to be talking about some pretty heavy topics. It might be triggering, and I really want to have this happen in a good way, and that we move forward in a good way, and that people are mindful and open and, you know, honor our conversation today. So I'm just opening this, and I also wanted to introduce myself. So I'm going to introduce myself in Hidatsa, so I can talk to my ancestors first. So Dosha, Maids Madaka Beho Bamia, Maids Nuete Shanice Mandan. Hello, my name is Holy Owl Woman. I am Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara, and I am a part of Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, and I am a grandmother and a mother, and I have been here at the Ikwa Law Center since 2014, and yeah, and I'm just gonna pass this to Shannon if you wanted to smudge, and I really, really hope that everybody gains from this conversation. I'm excited to have it with you, and I will pass it over to Michael and talk a little bit why I don't believe in land acknowledgements, and Michael does not either.
Yeah, good afternoon. It's great to see so many friends here. So my name is Michael Huesca, and I am a individual, a parent with lived experience. I was a tribal administrator here in San Diego for a tribe, and I've been working in ICWA and around ICWA for the last probably 6-7 years, where I've really actively been involved. In regards to land acknowledgements, as a Mexican indigenous man, I recognize the land today that I stand on here in San Diego was once my people were once considered Native, right? We were once considered Native American. And the land and the borders that exist today really separated us in a way, right? And so the land acknowledgement to me sometimes is not authentic. I sometimes feel that when people want to share land acknowledgement, is it really to acknowledge that this is not always our land? I mean, it was at one point, but it's been taken away. And so there's a lot of tribes that feel similar. The tribe that I represented for 2 years, I had an elder say to me, it's almost insulting, because it's like, if you really want to do something, give us back the land. Don't just acknowledge that you've taken it. And so Shauna and I, as Shauna stated, we want to start with the best intentions, but we also want to explain and share a little bit about how we feel as far as us as individuals and how we move forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Shauna.
Great. Okay. And as an Indigenous person, a citizen of Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, I've had a great grandpa who ended up committing suicide due to exactly what this government has done to my people, with the boarding schools, and with the fact that he had to decide who he was going to give his land to. And it hits me when people just talk about how this land used to be ours, and then there's nothing done done about that. And so for me, I just really think that, you know, there is a link in the resource thing where you guys can look at and see whose land that you're on, whose land it used to be. And yeah. So, but I would like to get forward to the good stuff and move on towards our panel. So I have Shannon Smith with me in my office today. And then we also have Sheldon Spotted Elk. And we wanted to talk about the Brackeen case and ICWA and kind of give some explanations about that.
Yeah, and I want to just thank you both for joining us. I mean, both Shauna and I have been heroes of yours. We think the world of you. You guys are our heroes, is what I was trying to say. And the work that you do. What's really important to me is that I know both of you are parents, and the work that you bring is so personal as well as important. So I just want to honor that as well and open this space up to have this conversation with a lot of folks who are parents in this space, who just really want to understand what's been going on.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. And likewise to you guys. You guys are my heroes, and appreciate all the work and impact that you're doing all the time. Remember meeting both of you guys for the first time, and super impressed at that time, and even more impressed right now just with the outcomes that you guys have created. And you guys are both forces to be reckoned with any room that you walk into. So happy to be here.
Agree completely.
So we're going to jump right in, and Shauna is going to start us off, I think, with some questions for us to get started.
Right. So I just appreciate all of that was said. So I kind of wanted to ask you, Shannon, and I always love the way you explain this. I wanted to kind of ask about ICWA, how it was started and why it was started and the importance of it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is my thoughts, and certainly, I know that, that there's a lot of people who can talk a lot about this, but what I know and the stories that I've heard, I am the director at the ICWA Law Center, and I've been here since about 1996. The Law Center was started in 1993, and there was amazing people who have been at the ICWA Law Center, and Leona Raish was our first elder in residence, and she was a grandma. She was an elder from the Red Lake Nation, and she would always talk about the power of grandmas. And I think for anyone who's had a relationship with a grandma, anyone with that connection to a grandma knows that there is power, right? There's power in the wisdom and the experience and the power in that connection. And for ICWA was passed in 1978, and it was passed because of grandmas. It was passed because of tribal leaders recognizing that the inherent sacred value of children, right? And so that connection and the importance of children and being able to place the highest importance on protecting the future and protecting children, and knowing that as grandmas, like, that's where the future was. Tribal leaders recognized that without children, tribes would not continue to exist. And that's really what ICWA is. It's about those connections, about the connections to family, connections to grandmas and grandpas. It's a connection to tribal communities and tribal nations. And that's really, that's what ICWA is. And so I think just knowing that there was grandmas who would go, and there's stories of at the Minneapolis American Indian Center in Minneapolis of grandmas coming around and being so committed to saying, look, we need to go, we need to go to Washington, right? Because we need to do something now. And they were in Minneapolis, and some of these grandmas who I've had an opportunity to meet were small, but they were mighty, right? And so they were going to let no one stop them. And, tribal leaders took notice. And so I think, to me, that's the story of ICWA. It's connections. And that's why it's so important still today, because those very connections still absolutely matter if there's going to be a future. And so protecting that, recognizing that, honoring that is really what this is all about.
Thanks, Shannon. That's a great, that's a story that I think is so important and we all need to hear. Sheldon, I'd like to know if you have more to add, and I'd like to know specifically when we think about this started with grandmas and then it got formalized and it was created. Can you give us the contents of how that transition took place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I'm going to talk a lot about lawyers and some of the work that they've done, but I just had a personal experience. I'll quickly share that. I went up to my hometown. This right behind me. This is Lame Deer, Montana, Northern Cheyenne country right here. And we did a family reunion. We even harvested buffalo. And I just really had a lot of anxiety about how this family reunion was going to be organized. But immediately aunties and grandmas in my family, here I thought I was organizing something. Everything was taken care of. So if you really want to have impact, it's really on the back of Indigenous women. And so the work that lawyers and advocates did in DC, it is on the back of courageous grandmothers, courageous mothers, courageous aunties, being willing to tell their story. You know, that's medicine in itself. And some of these stories are about the most dehumanizing moments of their life, you know, and so the courage that it takes to speak up in those contexts it can't be understated. But quickly, I'll share another story. So I got to go to have lunch one time in New York City with Bert Hirsch. And so he's one of the three lawyers that put pen to paper and wrote ICWA back in the 1970s. The other two lawyers, in case you ever get this question in Jeopardy, the other two lawyers are Alan Parker, who's Rocky Boy Cree from Montana, and Frank Ducheneau, who's a Standing Rock Sioux. And it's our values that were memorialized in this federal law. But that dinner that lunch, and then it turned into a dinner that I had with Bert Hirsch. He told me a lot of cool stories about representation, all sorts of in court and out of court representation that he was doing at the time, from east to west, north to south. But the things that he left me with is two things that I'll share with you right now. Is one, he said that ICWA is the only reparative law on the child welfare books. So if you look at the congressional findings of ICWA, it was passed to remedy injustice. And so at the time that ICWA was passed, 1 out of 3, think about these numbers, 1 out of 3 Native children were removed from their homes. 90% of those children that were removed from their home were placed with non-Indian families. And so this was something still active that was happening, post-boarding school, post-Indian adoption project that was also federally sponsored government removal. And so that law was passed to remedy that. And then the second thing he said, well, it's important for me to make a quick stop there. Today in 2023, we still have almost a ×3 disproportionality of Native children in foster care. So just that is unconscionable with the history that we have in our communities and our families. And so we all need to be allies and advocates when it comes to capturing not only the letter of the law, but I know we have a lot of practitioners on this call right now, but also the spirit of the law, how we see one another, how we think about this law, how we see family, Indigenous family integrity, you know, so I think that's really key and important. And then the second thing he said, right on the back of what I'm saying right now, is that ICWA is just words on paper, you know, it's just black ink on white paper. For it really to capture what it means, what ICWA means is, it takes collaboration. It takes you and I working in concert to making sure that we capture what ICWA is all about. And so it's not only a federal law, but it's a movement. I think it's a philosophy. It's a way to see the world. And so I know maybe if you hung out in a lot of Indian country, you might hear ICWA a lot, Indian child welfare a lot, because it's bigger than just a federal Indian law.
Thank you for that, Sheldon. I think one thing that we know about ICWA is that it's constantly challenged. And it just was challenged with the Brackeen case that we talked about in our first session. And I was hoping, Shannon, that you could explain about Brackeen, what was actually challenged and what it would have meant if it was overturned, and kind of how big of a win it was for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Holland v. Brackeen is a case, and I know that many of you have heard, you know, at least some about it. And it was a challenge to the constitutionality of ICWA. Really at the heart of the Brackeen case were 3 children. And one of the children involved was a child from Minnesota, a member of the White Earth Nation, and we had the honor to represent grandma. And really her story was about where she was going to be, who her connections were going to be moving forward. And ultimately the court in Minnesota decided that she needed to be with grandma. And everyone who ultimately was involved and knew this family and knew grandma, everyone ultimately agreed as far as within the court system. And so she was adopted by grandma and is with grandma and doing well. But still there was a challenge, and there was a challenge that kind of brought together these 3 different cases and an idea about what connections mattered and how to honor those connections. And so there was challenges brought by families who wanted to adopt children, challenges by the state of Texas. Ultimately was the only state that kind of continued to create those challenges. And their challenges were in some ways about their right or their entitlement, their sense of who should adopt. But really kind of at the heart of what they were challenging was tribal sovereignty and the role of the tribe in these children's lives, the connection of these children to their tribe and to their family. And they were kind of challenging ICWA on 3 kind of big rounds. I mean, there's some details within it, but one was whether or not the federal government has a relationship with tribes in a way that they can pass a statute. Can they pass laws in order to govern, to in a sense, be a part of Indian affairs? Can they protect tribal communities, or can they be a part of that? So that was one of the challenges, kind of that relationship between the federal government and tribes. So that was kind of at the core of some of the challenges in regards to sovereignty. There was other challenges in regards to whether or not the federal government could, in a sense, tell states how to be involved in child welfare cases, and could they could the federal government tell states, in a sense, and I'm kind of simplifying this, but tell them what to do in the context of child welfare, or require them to do certain things. So things about active efforts, could the federal government tell the states in regards to how they respond to families who are in the child welfare system, or how they respond to families who may be in crisis, and was that something that the government can do? So those were kind of 2 challenges that were brought. And then the third challenge really was about what was called equal protection. And this was a challenge basically indicating that they believe that the political relationship between a child and their tribe was something that wasn't significant. And really what ICWA was based on race. And so they were challenging kind of the very core existence of that relationship between a child and their tribe as being something that was political, or, in an often way people think about this, and I know that there's some concerns about this, but I think it is a useful way to kind of think about maybe what they were saying is the connection between a child and being a citizen of a sovereign nation, or being the citizen of a tribe. And that language, I know, sometimes doesn't set well with everyone, but the idea that they were a part of a sovereign nation as a member, and that relationship is political. So those were kind of the challenges, was, what the federal government's role was, but then also if ICWA was really just based on race and not based on this political relationship. And ultimately, the court made decisions that ICWA was constitutional, that the federal government has a unique relationship with tribal nations as sovereign nations, that they entered into treaties, that it was a government-to-government relationship, and that there was that continued relationship. They also found that the federal government was not commandeering or forcing the states to do anything, that it was certainly something that things like active efforts were something that was very was okay to do, right? That they were asking not only the government had to do it, but other parties had to do it. And so there's some different ideas about that. And then ultimately, the court did not make a decision in regards to kind of the other challenge, but just said that in the current case that this was not something that was properly before the court.
Great. Sheldon, I want to ask if you have more to add, and I want to just spin this a little bit in the sense that with the challenge, this wasn't the first time of a challenge, right? And I'm really wanting to know why. Let me back up. I learned through another program and another project that I was working on that the Brackeen case was so highly publicized, that it was so significant in child welfare that it was being talked about all over the place. And it was kind of interesting to see that that was happening. So my question to you is why? What was the significance? What was truly, I mean, granted what Shannon explained, but the impacts, what could that have been?
Oh, that's a good question. And I think that's kind of hard. I think, well, federally, so nationwide, there's an amicus brief. Let me back answer this question. So there's an amicus brief filed by my organization, Casey Family Programs, and had signatories from all national child welfare organizations that do national work, Indian organizations. They all signed the amicus brief and saying that ICWA is the gold standard of child welfare for all together. That's what I was talking a little bit earlier about the philosophy. It is a philosophy as well. It stands for this idea that children need to be connected. That's what makes it the gold standard. And so we work with active efforts more so than reasonable efforts to preserve family. And we look for culturally relevant services. We understand that children exist within families, kinship communities, and culture, and we value that. And all children deserve that, you know, not just American Indian children, all children deserve that. So I think that's probably a lot of the interest nationwide.
He froze. There he is.
Oh, I apologize. So the enemies of ICWA, I think that was also, I think I have bad internet right now. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We can hear you now.
I think I have a bad internet connection, so I'm gonna turn off my video. I apologize for that. And if I freeze again, I'll have to reconnect. I apologize. But I just think there's enemies of ICWA, and just for those reasons, the enemies of ICWA are, of course, always trying to challenge tribal sovereignty and those concepts that Shannon was talking about. You know, at the very core, these are 200-year-old Supreme Court precedents that really established the body of federal Indian law. There's lots of consequences that I feel like ICWA, by and large, was targeted, but ultimately trying to challenge, and I could take you all the way down the rabbit hole and put on my tin hat if you want me to do that and make all the connections, but really challenging our way of life and how it wasn't based upon capitalism or dehumanizing. Of course, Indigenous communities, we never saw children as property. That's the underpinning of Western law, is that children were property. And so we saw children as blessings. We saw them as connected individuals that needed love and nourishment. And so those are the things that were being challenged at the very core of what was happening at the Supreme Court. But nothing really happened, got to the legal analysis.
Thank you. And I think that video we saw really tugged on a lot of the cores of what we're talking about here today through the story of that daughter and her father and their history, and understanding our history, and the history is so important. Shauna?
I agree with that. So I want to go back to something that you mentioned, Sheldon. You said that ICWA is the golden standard. And just from either one of you, what does that mean to you?
I can talk a little bit about what it means to me every day. I have, well, as Michael recognized, I am a mom. I have 4 children. They are all teenagers. And I have the honor every day to represent moms in court. And I say it's an honor because I think what I have learned from the women that I have represented is something that has become a part of who I am and a part of who I want to be. And I think that inherent value that we have as moms and as dads, because of that connection to our child, that's what the gold standard is all about. It's responding to that connection and responding to that inherent value that each one of us has as a parent, and that how intrinsically valuable that is. And ICWA gives us an opportunity to respond to that. And I think that that is something that is truly, from a legal perspective, a gift, right? Like I love having the opportunity to be able to advocate with ICWA, but even in situations where we can respond to that human, the humanness of each of us, right? And I think like one thing that we had an elder who worked at our office, and we were talking one day about the importance of how we respond to individuals in crisis or in grief. And we inherently know from a very human aspect that when someone's hurting, that oftentimes our response on a very human level is to do more for them, right? We try to bring them food, we sit and we hold their hand, we go for a walk, we ask if we can help care for their children. We know that oftentimes when families come or a mom comes to me and she's entering into this child welfare system, she's at a point of crisis. She's at a point of oftentimes grieving, maybe the loss or the fear of losing her children to the system, at least even if it's for a night, right? Or the fear of losing them even longer. And our response systematically, our non-ICWA response, right, is to ask her to do more. Instead of responding to her in a way of like, we can help, we can provide active efforts, we can provide a connection, we can be there for you. We're like, hey, go do an assessment. Oh, you need to go do a UA, you go to treatment. And we're doing that at a time when responding in a way of hurt that we know on a human level doesn't work, right? And so I think ICWA gives us an opportunity to respond. It gives us an opportunity to honor connections. It gives us the opportunity to honor moms, right? And dads, and just their inherent value of being who they are as a mom, as a dad.
Great. Sheldon, did you want to add?
Sure, I'll take my video off just to make sure I don't freeze. But yeah, absolutely. I think being a father, I have two sons, and I think I see a lot of, I don't know, the way that I want to be as a father. I think that it's encapsulated in that. I've also represented children and briefly represented some parents in this process, as well as a lawyer, and advocating for their rights, for connectedness. And surprisingly enough, that is a radical idea in our society right now, to be connected. And I know a lot of people struggle with being disconnected, whether that be with their family or maybe that's with nature. So we live in a disconnected world. I'll quickly, just for the juxtapose, because I feel like that sometimes that's easier to explain it this way, at least for me it is. I was just having a conversation recently with a state legislator, and they asked me why ICWA doesn't apply to tribal courts. So there's 574 tribes, there's about 400 tribal courts in the country. And so ICWA as a federal law only applies to state process, and it's the gold standard for state process. So it's working within this colonized system where they see children as property and they see families as capitalist widgets, and so it's this pigeonhole, or it's this toehole rather, for humanity to exist. It's a chance in law for us to move with humanity. And so this individual asked me, well, if this is such the gold standard, why isn't tribes doing it? Cheyennes, we actually have a different gold standard. And so the gold standard for Cheyenne children, I share this sometimes. It's there's a Cheyenne term, Mahion Gutchgun. It means creator's child. And so that is our gold standard. That's the way we see children within our community. That's the way I was raised, and that's the way I'm trying to raise my sons, is to see them as gifts. Cheyennes, we live in a giveaway culture. And so giving gifts is really important. When children walk in the door, they themselves are a gift. So they don't need to give gifts. They're a blessing to all of us to be. And many of you guys have held babies or just been on maybe even on an airplane with a baby, and they're playing peekaboo with you. It makes you smile. Like they they gave you a blessing right there. They gave you a gift, you know, and so we've all experienced just some of the fortunate things of children bringing into our lives, and the youth that they bring and joy that they bring to us. And so those are the things that I think about when I think about the gold standard of it. Is it needs to be framed a little bit different. The last thing I'll share, and it's also connected Cheyenne language, back to this balance idea, is that I recently, my dad's first language is Cheyenne. Unfortunately, the vestiges colonization, I only speak a little bit of Cheyenne. I only know the cuss words and a few sentences. And so, but I asked him, how you say justice? What's the concept of justice in Cheyenne? And the word is esto menis, and it means, it's a sacred word. You don't even use it in a secular context. It's a sacred thing that you would talk about. And it's describing you being in the middle of a circle and having reciprocity with everything around you. Our ceremonies and our culture for Cheyennes, that connections to humanity and to nature. And so that's just for us all to be in that balance. And I'll have to admit, sometimes I fall out of that circle, right? And I need people to help me back into that circle. You know, I need mentors and people that love me to bring me back into that circle, so I'm back in balance. And we all do. We all do need that type of love, you know. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, that definitely is very important, and I appreciate you sharing that. You know, Shauna and I have talked many times about, you know, the spirit of ICWA, and, you know, again, being Mexican, indigenous, I think about all the children who have slipped through the cracks that are in the system, who really are Native but can't claim being Native. I think about all the children who are Native and are still in the system, and how that system is designed to fail against them, right? To support them. So one of the things we try to promote is really the spirit of ICWA. How do we take the core principles? And again, from Shauna, reminding us that what we see in ICWA is the bare minimum, right? It's not even, as you pointed out, your people have an elevated version, or your own version, which is, this is bare minimum. So how do we take the spirit of ICWA and apply it to every child? And, you know, we've talked about, you know, core values and principles that could be applied. So I'm very curious from either one of you, if you have thoughts and inputs, and what are some in the spirit of ICWA, what are the core principles that could help every child in the work that we do today?
Yeah, I mean, I think connection is kind of the overriding. But I think within ICWA, active efforts, I think about how do we respond to families, and how do we provide a response that is meaningful to them and specific to them. In the world of child welfare and case plans and, you know, assessments, oftentimes there's this sense of, you know, everyone is going to get the same. And just kind of how absurd that is when we know that not every family is going to respond the same or need the same, but we continue to do that. And so I think active efforts really pushes us to have a unique response to the individual needs of that family, taking into account, you know, culture as healing, recognizing, you know, inherently the importance of recognizing tribal values and customs, and recognizing the importance of families, right? Where they came from and who they are and what's going to help them to heal and move forward. So I think, again, the opportunity of ICWA is a core principle with active efforts, with connection to family, connection to culture, is something that every child in the child welfare system should have. I think active efforts really compels us to respond to a child as if they're our relative. And I think that's unique to ICWA, but certainly something that should be true of how we respond to any child who is impacted by the child welfare system. So I think ICWA, kind of the core principles as far as response and connection, are something that our system as a whole would benefit from and needs.
Thank
I'll
you.
jump in. Casey actually had written a brief, and so I think it's in the resources that were handed out. And so they really kind of look at what Shannon's talking about, exactly what Shannon's talking about, is how do we coordinate and orient everybody towards values. And I think that's really the most key aspect to this, you know. And so having a recipe, you know, like, and following a recipe, you could still undermine people's humanity by following just the recipe and checking boxes, you know. And so being values led first. And so if you're working within an organization, how do we promote, or if you're working in a jurisdiction, how do you promote family integrity? How do you promote the values that Shannon's talking about, is tailoring these efforts directly to the family, being thoughtful and culturally humble when we're starting to think about the types of services that they would like to engage in, and opportunities for self-determination to happen. And so these are some things that the system needs to hear right now. To take one quick step back, I meant to mention this earlier about Justice Gorsuch, I think, and I'm not going to romance him too much because he's kind of been terrible on a lot of other opinions, but he wrote the concurrence in the Holland v. Brackeen case. He's considered an originalist. So, and then oftentimes originalists don't really, for American Indian issues and Black issues and people of color issues in this country, of course, when the Constitution was signed, they weren't necessarily thinking about us. And when they did think about Black people, they were three-fifths of a human being, you know, so women were not considered. And so there's a lot of people that were not considered when the Constitution was signed. And so when you think about it through an originalist lens, sometimes it undermines some of those values. However, I felt like in this case, what he really did, and he spent a lot of times on, is understanding context. So what was happening when Article 1 was drafted, and it says Congress shall regulate commerce between foreign nations, states, and Indian tribes. So what was the thinking at that time? You know, how broad is that authority? And he provides a lot of context to what that federal trust relationship was that's based upon treaties. And I think that's really key when we come back to the cases like that, that we work on and that we get to be involved with on the ground. I think context is so key, or else we'll miss it. We can miss the mark by a mile, in fact, actually, if we don't take the time to see that context. In fact, I can remember being a 1L in law school, and I remember in criminal law, we read this case called State v. Williams. Remember like it was yesterday, because it's a case about involuntary manslaughter, about a Native mother who doesn't take her child to the hospital. The child gets gangrene and an infection, and the child dies. And so she's being charged with involuntary manslaughter. None of that opinion is about the context, about how indigenous women going to the hospital led to involuntary sterilizations, oftentimes led to removal of children. There's a lot of angst about interacting with Western medicine. So there's no context whatsoever with that. And how can we actually get to the center of justice when we leave out all of that? And so I think what Shannon's talking about, for us to see each other's humanity, those are the gold standard principles, and how we could spread that across the system would be really key and critical.
Thank you for that. And, you know, I just want, while we have these two wonderful, amazing, and wise, knowledgeable experts, if anybody has any questions for them, please feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'm not looking at the chat, but if anybody has any questions, please let us know.
Kara's got our back on that. So
Yeah.
if anybody
Right.
does have any questions, please raise your hand. We'd love you to join the conversation. And there I see my
Victoria
friend
has a hand.
Victoria.
Yeah, I can't help but to have a question. I recognize you all as national consultants, so just really kind of hoping that you would give me a perspective on looking at the work that you see nationally and standing it beside ICWA. What do you really see happening? And is there any kind of indication or anything you'd like to share about that gap, or those challenges, or nationally?
I can, I guess one thing, and this is probably, and I'm trying to be really hopeful because there is a lot of hope, but I think there's just so much work to be done. I mean, so much work to be done in Minnesota, but so much work to be done nationally. And I think that we have to elevate the voice of parents. We have to elevate the voice of families, because the child welfare system has existed, and I can't speak for every state, but I know Minnesota, and I know many other states, we have systems that have responded to families collectively without recognizing their unique story, their unique needs, and kind of, as Sheldon was saying, without the context of why things are where they're at, right? Like, I feel like the child welfare system brings together kind of the discrepancies, the bias, the racism, the hurts of all the systems, right? So the education system, the criminal justice system, the health system, the mental health system, and all these systems that have not responded to the individual and unique needs of families and communities all come together in the child welfare system. And I think that gives us a unique opportunity, but it means that we have a whole lot of work. And I think the only way that there is going to be change is if we listen to families and we listen to parents about how to respond and where things are. And I think acknowledge, right? Like, I think we have to acknowledge that we're in systems nationally, certainly in Minnesota, where the disparities are horrific. And as Sheldon said, unconscionable. Like, we can't continue to move forward this way. So I think, like, when I look at a group, of people coming together, when I see Shauna, when I see Michael, and I see like the different, all the people that they're impacting and their voice, and we have to elevate those voices. I mean, elevate voices of families. Otherwise, we are going to continue to do what we've been doing, and it simply does not work. And it's destroying families, it's destroying children, and it is not sustainable. And not okay. I mean, for all those reasons, but it's just, so I think the voice of parents is my, I will tell you, and this, I'll try to tell you in like 1 minute, but I will say that, Shauna, I think you said you've been at the Law Center since 2014. I've been at the Law Center since like 1996, whatever, a long time. But my work and how I thought about my work fundamentally changed when I met Shauna. And it wasn't because she came to us and said, "Hey, Law Center, you're doing a great job." She's like, actually the exact opposite, right? Like, things need to change. And we still have a long ways to go, but I will say that it fundamentally changed how I listened and fundamentally changed how I thought about our work, because her voice of what she had experienced, it was very clear that things needed to change. And so I think through her voice, I've changed how I've done my work. I've changed, I've represented thousands of families. And so hopefully, at the, again, kind of like on the back of the grandmas where ICWA created, it's going to be on the back of families where their stories are heard and listened to and told again, because that's absolutely what matters.
Thank you for that, Shannon. I appreciate that so much. And Michael and I are huge lived support advocates. We think that anybody trying to, we love to be invited to the table, but when I first started this job, I got invited to the table, but now I decided that I also want to help decide what's on the menu and I want to help cook it. Right. And so, and I don't know if there's more questions.
Yes, we had 2 come into the chat, so I just want to elevate those. The first one came in from Selena of just wondering what folks think about a connection between the spirit of ICWA and kinship care. Is there an opportunity to build a direct application of ICWA values into kinship care reform? And I think I really heard that this is something that really can be embedded in everything, and we really need to start doing that with some great intentionality. But I want to pass it to our great team to share any thoughts you all might have.
Yeah, and Sheldon, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. I think that's a great opportunity. Of course, there's placement preferences within ICWA, those that don't know, and it's really preferencing family and kin. I forgot to add this earlier when we were talking about gold standard, is that ICWA was so vanguard when it was passed back in the late 70s that 0 states had kinship finding requirements. And now 48 out of 50 states have kinship finding requirements for all children that are in the system. And about half of the state systems have fictive kin provisions within their state law. So the child's tribe, if you will. And so I absolutely, ICWA's been vanguard and leading the way when it comes to engaging kin by law. Sometimes when it actually happens on the ground, actually national data studies show that American Indian children are placed more with kin than any other race. So that is one success, maybe. I know in some jurisdictions, there's still challenges of complying with placement preferences. But I think the key aspect of this is there's some federal barriers when it comes to 4E and how funding and financial supports go to kinship providers and the licensing requirements. And I know as a Native parent, it's hard for me to, or a Native uncle, it'd be really hard for me to immediately open up my home to state licensing requirements, and I don't think I necessarily have anything going on in my home that would make, I'm sure I would qualify, but it would be really hard for me to go through that process of having a state person come in and license me and say I'm good enough, so I think there's some areas that could be improved on that.
Yeah, I think the idea to elevate the spirit of ICWA across the board is so important, and it's a great opportunity for all of us. I think that, we want to see what's best for children and families. There's no doubt about that. And, there's a model that works, and there's value that we could, really use from these models. There's lessons that we've learned from, ICWA being the gold standard, even though the version that we know is the minimum, right, of ICWA. So just imagine what we could do and how we can impact the system if we started to shift and really elevate values and recognize children and the connections that children have to their families and their people. I think it's so important to continue to lift.
Thank you for that. And I want to just kind of keep on that theme of children, because that question came in about that, and Sheldon dropped a great link in the chat. But the question was about what efforts are being put forth to educate youth about their heritage on a national level. And thank you, Sheldon, for putting in that Native Youth Together by Unity resource to really kind of be helpful. And I like how you elevated that learning about heritage or culture values are best learned in a family community. And I just didn't know if you wanted to speak any to the great resource that you shared with everyone.
Well, yeah, that's it. I think Unity is done for many years now. I don't know how many years they've been in existence, but like 40 or 50 years. And so they've been doing really awesome work as far as providing space for national gatherings and cultivating leadership. But when it comes down to like what it means to be Cheyenne and how my sons are learning about that, I should be living those values in my home. I should be having those conversations at the dinner table. And fortunately, I was lucky enough to have that in my house. My dad was there with me and taught me those values and lived those values. And so I was lucky to have that in my life. And I want to make sure I do that for my sons and my nephews and nieces as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much good stuff that came out of this conversation today. And first off, I want to thank you guys again. And I also want to thank all of our friends that are listening in. And if you feel like this was valuable, Shauna and I are open to coming back again and doing a part 3, because we think this is important to have an ongoing, conversation, really elevating what we can do and how we can take these core values and implement them in our daily life and in the work that we do. So I thank you guys again. And Shauna, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I think everything that everyone said today is so important. I hope everybody took it in. And I hope this really sparks something in you to start thinking about how, the principles of ICWA could impact you in your daily work. When you're working with families, how we can lessen the trauma, as a person who grew up and aged out of foster care, I think it would have been wonderful for me to have been with family and less traumatic and kept me tied to my culture, as opposed to moving to 4 different non-Indigenous families in 4 years, and how I lost a lot of, what was important to me, my ceremonies, the powwows, the food, just smudging, So I really hope that this really sparks something in you to think about how you can start incorporating the principles of ICWA into your own work and your own jurisdictions. And I think we have a link to see if you guys wanted to possibly have a part 3.
Yes, and so Shauna and Michael, Sheldon and Shannon, thank you so much for such a jam-packed, there's just so many little nuggets throughout your presentation of things you said, things for us to think about, powerful takeaways, powerful action steps that we all can take today. I saw in the chat a lot of people making personal connections today to some of the things that were shared. I saw people saying, come on, what's next for the BPNN? What's next for the Birth and Foster Parent Partnership that the Children's Trust Fund Alliance also supports? And how do we really build that into action? And Amanda, I see you already saying, like, let's get this going. I see others dropping ideas. Please keep dropping those ideas in the chat because we are going to look at them, but I'm going to ask Chloe to drop our evaluation link. Please take a moment, fill that evaluation out as we go over these last few thoughts with you all as we close out for today. But I just can't thank our panelists enough for their time, their expertise, and their hearts that they shared today. Because while, yes, this is an opportunity to share information, the investment that Michael and Shauna and Sheldon and Shannon shared and the content that they shared with us today was something super powerful and just really gave us things for us to be thinking about. So some takeaways that we're going to encourage you to be thinking about as you leave is to remember things like this. ICWA is the golden standard. And I want you to think back to the panel conversation of how Michael and Shauna asked Shannon and Sheldon, what does that mean to them? And they had to put it in their own words. That's something you could do today. What does that mean to you? I also think this was an important piece as we were preparing this presentation. This idea about valuing inclusive and diverse cultural practices promotes resilience in children and families. There's something about that little girl at the end of the video dancing that has stuck with me throughout the presentation today. And I feel like today especially, we focused on children and we really kept talking about how do we help children. And I encourage you to think about, what does this mean for you? What does inclusive mean? What is diverse cultural practices? What does that actually look like in the communities you're in? That was the challenge that Shauna issued to all of you, to be aware of who are the tribes that are in the area, that were in the area, that you literally are sitting on at this very moment. Check that out. And there's actions you can start today. You can check out that. You can go back and watch part 1. We will be getting this and the slides all posted to the BPNN webpage. You can watch part 1 and part 2. You could hold a roundtable, a focus group in your own community, sharing this information and connecting. You can be dropping in the evaluation ideas of how do we keep this moving? What do you need? What are the supports? Because without you telling us, it goes back to that piece that Shannon and Sheldon were stressing to you all. Without parent voice, without your voices, we can't do this work. We need to hear from you. What do you need? And so your action steps, think about, determine how you might implement the principles of ICWA. And if you're like, Kara, I have no idea what that is, what you're talking about, go watch part 1 or go look at the slides. They're right there. And Michael and Shauna have a great layout that just ties it all together. Explore who you are and who are your partners that you can help to share this learning, and identify what makes up your own identity and culture, because that's another important piece that I feel like we really learned today, that this isn't politics. This isn't formal stuff. This is, who are people as people? Who are they? What makes them the unique, incredible gift that Sheldon talked about? Explore that, learn that, think about that, and take some time to sit with that. As we get ready to close, as you're filling out that evaluation, can you tell I really want to hear your feedback? There are some great resources. These resources, you're going to be like, Kara, I can't write them all down. Don't worry. It's on the Alliance's website. We will repost because Shauna and Michael and Shannon and Sheldon have pulled together some additional ones to add to our great list. So that is building. So know that there's ones to explore. There's ones to read. There's ones you can listen to. There's so many great resources to help you further your own journey of understanding ICWA and understanding what does it mean in your work? What does it mean in your day-to-day life? And what does it mean in your community? We had so many questions. I'm going to be going back through the chat if there were any that we missed and there's any follow-up needed, or you put something in your evaluation. See, plugged it again. We will figure out a way to connect back to make sure that those questions get answered and we can connect with you and make sure that those things are settled. If you registered today, you are going to be getting another email blast from me saying everything's on the website. But speaking of websites, another great one, and this actually came up as a question, is how do we bring ICWA into the Family First Prevention Service Act work? And so if you want to explore that, I'm going to have to do some of my own homework and see if there's anything that Family Voices United has done around that yet. Because Family Voices United has partnered with Generations United, Children's Trust Fund Alliance, Foster Club, and we all are partnered together to really talk about family first. There's tons of resources, but like I said, I need to go back through and see what is there about ICWA and then link it into the section of resources for you. So be watching for that to pop up. Of course, save the dates. Our next Caring Conversations is going to be on Monday, July 17th. We invite you to come and join us for that. It happens at 1 p.m. Eastern every week. And then we have our next BPNN webinar coming up August 17th. It's going to be really amazing. It's around the topic of mental health. So be watching for more information to come about that. Of course, fill out the evaluation for us because we want to hear your feedback and get that ideas from you, hear from you, and learn from you because you have so much that you all shared and brought to this today too. So please make sure you take time to do that. And most importantly, we want to thank you. Thank you for being a part of the BPNN community. Thank you for being a part of our time together today. And please, if we can reach out and help in any way, Meryl Levine, our National Director of Parent Partnerships, would be happy to help support you, as well as our Executive Director, Teresa Furfell. They are strong supporters of this work. And most importantly, they're strong supporters of Parent Voice. And how do we really do this work in partnership, authentic partnership, hearing from you all? And one perfect example of that is this started as just a conversation. Michael and Shauna saying, Kara, we're really passionate about this. We want to do something for the BPNN. I was like, okay, what are we going to do? And they're like, well, we can start at the beginning. Not everybody knows everything. And they created a phenomenal, impactful part one. And then they're like, but Kara, we got to tell them there's a part two. It's coming. And we're going to tie it to the Supreme Court case. I was like, well, guys, how's that possible? Like, we have no idea when that decision is going to be made. How are we going to put something on a calendar? And they're like, trust us. And we did. And look at what they pulled together for you all. They had the opportunity to put together an incredible celebratory video. They put together a powerful presentation today for you all. But most importantly, they built a community for us to really start understanding what does ICWA mean? How do we normalize this language in our communities? How do we really elevate it from being this policy to being a true practice that makes a difference for children and families? And so I just want to say thank you once again to Michael and Shauna for having such a powerful dream and for bringing it to us to be able to gift it to the network. And thank you so much for your time and your investment of pulling your resources, sharing your family with us, but also helping us to hopefully make a broader change for all the children out there who really need a voice. Thank you, thank you. And Shannon and Sheldon, thank you for your expertise and what you do every day in your work. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join the BPNN today and share a little of that and be with us. And again, there's so many little pieces today that I could pull out of little quotes that you've said or things that are just going to stay with us forever. But I see Michael and Shauna, I want to see if you have any final reflections as we close out this part two, and we'll see what the future holds.
Thank you, Kara. I do. I think that if we take away the key principles of ICWA, and like Shannon said, every child deserves to be recognized and humanized, and they deserve the right to be around their family. They deserve the right to be around their community. And I think, you know, when we do those things, it's less traumatic for a child than being put into stranger care or foster care. And I think like ICWA and the principles of it is a path to child well-being.
And I have to share a quick story. While we were on the Zoom, I was getting blown up on one of my phones. Last week, I testified in a 388, which for those of you who know, this was an option for a grandfather who had been struggling. He's an African-American grandfather who had been struggling to get his 3 grandchildren. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. And I testified before a new judge, a brand new judge in child welfare, because during COVID, these kids were taken away. Grandpa has been there since the start. And it was the children were placed in a foster to adopt home. And the foster parent made an allegation that grandpa showed up drunk because grandpa fell asleep during a visit. What really the judge didn't know, and nobody asked, was grandpa had to get on a bus, 2 buses to get to court on time, to get to the visit on time, and he had to leave his house at 4 a.m. Okay, who is going to still be awake at 1 o'clock, right? I mean, I struggle sometimes. So I was able to testify before the court, and I kept referring to the spirit of ICWA, and the county council, everybody was objecting, saying, this is an African-American male. He doesn't have any indigenous blood. He doesn't have, and I said, stop. We're talking about a child well-being system. You are all here talking about child well-being system. We need to start acting, and we need to stand up, and we need to use what's out there that we know works. I got message that the judge has given grandpa 18 months and has ordered that he be reviewed for placement, which wasn't done before. So I'm super excited because I think all of you can do the same thing. There is something there in ICWA. There is something we could use. And if we argue the spirit of ICWA, it will work for every child. We just got to be able to be passionate and keep pushing, and certainly lift child well-being, because this is proven that this is what families need. Connection to our children, connection to each other is what we need. And so it's encouraging, and it came at perfect timing, because I think this grandpa and these children deserve this chance to really be able to get out of the system and thrive together. So I just wanted to share all that with you as it just came across. So thank you all for spending this time with us. And we look forward to part 3.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And it teaches us that this is current. This is not just something that happened in the past. It's literally happening even while we're on this BPNN webinar today. And Kim, I see a beautiful haiku that you put in that says, elevate your voice, community inclusion, stories share our truths. And I just thank you for that beautiful haiku that you dropped in the chat to encourage us to take some action today. And to Coria, I love it. Part more. And that is a great way to say we have wonderful work ahead, and great work because we have our partnerships and our relationships with each other. So let's work on building those relationships and connections. And with that, I want to pass it for our final queen of all connectors, our amazing executive director, Teresa Raffel at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance, who really makes amazing things happen and believes in the parents that she's a partner with in more ways than I can ever express gratitude for.
Oh, thank you, Kara. That's so sweet. That's a new title. I'll embrace it. I'm not going to make us be late, I promise, but I really want to give a heartfelt thank you to Michael and Shauna and our other guests today. A 2-part series in the midst of all the changes in the Supreme Court decision. So you're having to track the news and update, and it's quite an undertaking, and we're very grateful. Clearly, people are ready for more. I am too. I've learned so much from you guys. And Shannon, it's great to meet you today. We hope you'll become part of our work. And just everyone who participated and, that you've given your time, your haikus and your energy to just to looking at, and Michael, that you help expand the definition of indigenous that many of us think about, I think is really important too. And talking about the spirit of ICWA and how that can apply to all of us. So you've really expanded our thinking. All of you have quite a bit. And I really, really thank you, and Kara, for your great leadership and all of this work. So I know I speak for Meryl too when I say a big thank you to all of us, to all of you. I'll turn it back to you, Kara.
Thank you so much, Teresa. So everyone, absolutely, Michael, you will always have my support. And most importantly, that friendship and connection. I think that's one of the takeaways that I encourage you all to leave with today, is it's about our true connections. There's a lot of great work ahead to do, but if we keep the work in the front, we're going to miss the opportunities for real connection and relationship. So lead with relationship and connection, and you can't go wrong. We are going to be sending out a notification since you registered, and also because I will have your information on the evaluation. Sorry, I had to say it one more time because I'm watching to see if we're getting some feedback, and we are getting some, and I'm super excited about that. But I'd love to hear more from all of you of how is today, what else can we do, and what is this part more going to look like? What else do we need to do, and how do we build it together? So please take time to share that feedback with us. Please take care of you. And if there's anything that we can do as you help take this message out into your community, to your family, and to all those other connections you're building, let us know. We look forward to staying connected in the future. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great rest of your week. We look forward to hopefully seeing you back in August. Take care, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you need that piece of paper?
No.
Okay.